The morning sun cast long shadows across Westminster Abbey as crowds gathered outside, their excitement building with each passing hour. Inside the ancient walls, Prince William stood before a mirror in the robing room, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his ceremonial uniform. Today was the day he would officially become heir apparent, a moment that had been planned for months but felt surreal now that it had arrived. Catherine stood beside him, her elegant dress perfectly pressed, offering quiet words of encouragement. The children had been dressed in their finest clothes hours earlier. With young Prince George looking particularly nervous about his role in the ceremony, Princess Charlotte kept smoothing her dress, while Prince Louis fidgeted with his collar, asking repeatedly when they could go home to play. The weight of history pressed down on William's shoulders as he thought about all the monarchs who had walked these same halls before him. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had passed just 2 years earlier, leaving behind a legacy that seemed impossible to follow. His father, now King Charles, had waited his entire life for this transition of power, and William wondered if he would ever feel truly ready for what lay ahead. Palace staff moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, checking last-minute details and coordinating with security teams. The guest list included heads of state from around the world, each arrival carefully timed and orchestrated. Outside, television crews from dozens of countries prepared to broadcast the ceremony to an estimated audience of 2 billion people. Worldwide, as William walked through the corridors toward the Abbey's main hall, he caught glimpses of familiar faces among the guests. Foreign dignitaries nodded respectfully, while longtime family friends offered warm smiles of support. The Archbishop of Canterbury waited at the altar, ceremonial robes pristine and his expression solemn yet kind. The sound of the organ began to fill the abbey, its deep notes resonating through the stone walls and reaching every corner of the sacred space. William took a deep breath, knowing that in just minutes he would step into a role that would define the rest of his life. The ceremony would be watched by millions, but in this quiet moment before it all began, he felt the profound responsibility of continuing a 1,000-year tradition. Catherine squeezed his hand gently, a small gesture that reminded him he wasn't alone in this journey. Together, they had faced public scrutiny, personal challenges, and the constant pressure of royal life. Now, they would face this new chapter together, knowing that their every move would be analyzed and remembered by history. The doors to the main hall opened slowly, and the first notes of the processional began. William straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and prepared to walk toward his destiny, unaware that a single unexpected moment during the ceremony would touch the hearts of millions watching around the world. The processional music swelled through Westminster Abbey as Prince William began his slow, measured walk down the aisle. Every step echoed against the ancient stones, each footfall marking his progression toward a destiny he had been preparing. For his entire life, the assembled guests rose in unison, their faces turned toward him with expressions of respect and anticipation. Television cameras captured every angle as William moved with the grace and dignity that had been instilled in him since childhood. His military uniform was perfectly pressed, metals gleaming in the soft light that filtered through the Abbey's stained glass windows. Behind him, Catherine followed with their children, each step carefully rehearsed but still feeling momentous. And the ceremony began with traditional hymns that had been sung in this same space for centuries. William's voice joined the chorus, though television microphones caught the slight tremor in his tone that revealed his nervousness. King Charles watched from his throne, his eyes never leaving his son, a mixture of pride and understanding visible in his expression as the Archbishop of Canterbury began the formal proceedings. William found himself thinking about his mother, Princess Diana, who should have been there to witness this moment. Her absence felt particularly sharp today, a hollow space among all the pomp and ceremony. He had often wondered what advice she would have given him, what words of wisdom she might have shared about carrying the weight of the crown. The first part of the ceremony proceeded flawlessly, each ritual performed with the precision that comes from months of careful planning. William knelt at the appropriate moments, spoke his responses clearly, and maintained the composure expected of future royalty. The watching world saw a man perfectly prepared for his role, confident and steady under the enormous pressure. Young Prince George stood nearby, his small face serious with concentration as he watched his father participate in rituals he didn't fully understand but knew were important. Princess Charlotte held her mother's hand tightly, while Prince Louis seemed fascinated by the elaborate decorations and the sea of faces surrounding them. The abbey fell silent as the archbishop prepared to administer the most solemn oaths of the ceremony. This was the moment when William would formally accept his role as heir, pledging to serve the British people and the Commonwealth with dedication and honor. The weight of those promises hung in the air, understood by everyone present. International guests watched with keen interest, many of them leaders who would need to work closely with William in the years to come. The ceremony represented not just a personal milestone for the prince, but a moment of transition for Britain's relationships with nations around the world. As William prepared to speak his most important vows, a subtle change came over his demeanor. The cameras caught something shifting in his expression, a momentary vulnerability that hadn't been visible before. It was as if the full magnitude of what he was undertaking had suddenly become real to him in a way it hadn't been just moments earlier. The archbishop raised his voice to begin the next phase of the ceremony, and William lifted his head to meet the moment head-on, still unaware that the most powerful moment of the entire day was yet to come. The ceremony had reached its most solemn point when the unexpected happened. As William knelt before the Archbishop of Canterbury, preparing to receive the ceremonial sword that would symbolize his commitment to defend the realm, something caught his eye in the front row of seats reserved for family members. There, in a wheelchair that hadn't been there during rehearsals, sat an elderly woman he recognized immediately, Mrs. Eleanor Davies, his childhood nanny who had cared for him, and Prince Harry, after their mother's death, had somehow been brought to witness this moment. She was 93 years old now, frail and barely able to speak above a whisper, but her eyes were bright with tears of joy. William's composure, so carefully maintained throughout the morning, began to crack. His eyes filled with tears as memories flooded back of this woman who had held him when he cried, who had read him bedtime stories, and who had helped him navigate the darkest period of his young life. She had retired years ago. He hadn't seen her in months due to her declining health. The cameras captured every second as William's lip began to tremble. He tried to maintain his dignity, but the sight of Eleanor Davies sitting there, having made what must have been an enormous effort to attend his ceremony, overwhelmed him completely. This wasn't just about royal protocol or state ceremonies anymore. This was about the people who had loved him unconditionally and shaped him into the man he had become. Eleanor raised one shaky hand in a small wave, mouthing the words, "I'm proud." A view that only William could see. That simple gesture shattered any remaining composure he had left. Tears began streaming down his face openly, and for a moment, the future king looked exactly like the little boy Eleanor had once comforted during thunderstorms. The Archbishop of Canterbury, recognizing what was happening, paused the ceremony. With remarkable grace, placed a gentle hand on William's shoulder and waited, understanding that some moments transcend ritual and protocol. The entire abbey fell silent, except for the soft sound of William trying to compose himself. Catherine, watching from nearby, felt her own eyes fill with tears. She knew how much Eleanor had meant to William during those difficult years after Diana's death. The elderly nanny had been more than hired help. She had been a source of stability and love when everything else felt uncertain and painful. Television. Viewers around the world witnessed something extraordinary. Instead of seeing a perfectly controlled royal ceremony, they were watching a genuine human moment of love and gratitude. Social media exploded with comments from people who were moved by William's raw emotion and the obvious love between him and his former caregiver. King Charles, observing from his position nearby, felt a surge of pride watching his son show such authentic emotion. This wasn't weakness. This was the kind of genuine humanity that would make William a better king. The ability to be moved by love and loyalty was exactly the quality that would help him connect with people throughout his reign. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. But it was actually only about 30 seconds before William managed to wipe his eyes and nod to the Archbishop that he was ready to continue. However, that half-minute of authentic emotion had transformed what might have been a routine ceremonial event into something deeply personal and unforgettable. Eleanor Davies sat back in her wheelchair with a satisfied smile, knowing that her presence had given William exactly what he needed in that moment. A reminder of the love that had sustained him through difficult times and would continue to guide him in the challenges ahead. Within minutes of William's emotional moment, social media platforms around the world began buzzing with reactions from viewers who had witnessed something unprecedented. The hashtag William Tears began trending globally as millions of people shared their own emotional responses to seeing the future king break down in front of his. Childhood nanny television commentators, initially caught off guard by the unscripted moment, quickly adapted their coverage to focus on the human story unfolding before them. Royal experts who had prepared to discuss ceremonial protocols instead found themselves explaining the significance of Eleanor Davies and her role in William's life after his mother's death. In living rooms across Britain, families watched with tears in their own eyes as the moment replayed on news channels. Many viewers commented that they had never felt more connected to the royal family than in that instant when William showed such genuine vulnerability. The image of him crying while looking at his elderly nanny resonated with anyone who had ever been loved by a grandparent or caregiver. International news outlets scrambled to provide background information about Eleanor Davies, reaching out to former palace staff and royal biographers who could explain her importance in William's life. Photos from his childhood began circulating, showing a young prince with the woman who had helped raise him during some of his most difficult years. The ceremony continued with renewed energy after William composed himself. But the atmosphere in the abbey had completely changed. What had begun as a formal state occasion now felt like a family gathering, with guests visibly moved by the authentic emotion they had witnessed. Even the usually stoic palace guards seemed to stand a little taller, proud to be protecting someone who showed such genuine humanity. Catherine watched her husband complete the remaining ceremonies with obvious admiration. She'd always known about his deep affection for Eleanor Davies, but seeing him honor that relationship so publicly, even when it meant showing vulnerability on the world stage, reinforced why she had fallen in love with him years earlier. Children were fascinated by their father's tears, with Prince Louis whispering loudly enough for nearby microphones to catch, "Why is Papa crying?" Princess Charlotte quietly explained that sometimes people cry when they're very happy, demonstrating wisdom beyond her years that would be quoted in newspapers the next day. News organizations that had planned standard coverage of a royal ceremony suddenly found themselves with a much more compelling story. The image of William's tear-streaked face as he looked at Eleanor Davies became one of the most shared photographs in royal history, representing a new generation of monarchy that wasn't afraid to show genuine emotion. Eleanor Davies herself became an overnight sensation, as journalists discovering her remarkable story of service to the royal family spanning nearly 4 decades. Her quiet dignity and the obvious love between her and William captured hearts around the world, making her a symbol of the unsung heroes who serve others with devotion. The moment also sparked conversations about grief, love, and the people who helped shape us during our most vulnerable times. Mental health advocates praised William for showing that even those in positions of great responsibility are human beings with deep emotional connections to the people who have cared for them. Royal historians noted that while there had been other moments of emotion during royal ceremonies, this felt different because it was so clearly unplanned and genuine. William hadn't chosen to show vulnerability for public relations purposes. He had simply been overcome by love and gratitude in a way that couldn't be hidden or controlled. As the ceremony concluded and guests began to file out of the abbey, it was clear that something significant had shifted in how people viewed the royal family, and particularly Prince William's future reign. Later that evening, after all the official photographs had been taken and the state dinner had concluded, William found himself in a quiet moment with Eleanor Davies in a private sitting room at Buckingham Palace. The elderly woman had been carefully helped from her wheelchair to a comfortable armchair, where she sat wrapped in a soft blanket, still wearing the gentle smile that had comforted him as a child. "Never expected to see you there today," William said softly, pulling a chair close to hers so they could speak without straining her voice. "How did you manage to come? I was told you weren't well enough to travel." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with mischief despite her frail condition. "Your father arranged it all," she whispered. "He called me last week and said you needed to see a familiar face in the crowd. He was quite right, wasn't he?" Her voice was barely audible, but her words carried the same warmth that had comforted him through countless childhood troubles. William felt tears threatening again as he realized his father had orchestrated this surprise, understanding better than anyone what this moment would mean to his son. King Charles had lost his own mother just 2 years earlier and knew the importance of having connections to the past during times of major transition. "You know," Eleanor continued slowly, "your mother would have been so proud of you today, not just because of the ceremony, but because you weren't afraid to show your heart. She always said that would be your greatest strength as a king." The mention of Diana brought fresh tears to William's eyes, but these were tears of gratitude rather than grief. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Eleanor's presence bringing the same peace it had when William was a frightened 10-year-old trying to understand why his world had suddenly changed. Her hand, now spotted with age and trembling slightly, still had the same gentle touch that had dried his tears decades earlier. Catherine joined them eventually, bringing tea and sitting quietly while William and Eleanor reminisced about old times. She watched her husband transform back into the boy Eleanor remembered, his formal demeanor replaced by genuine affection and the easy comfort of someone with a beloved grandmother. "I brought something for you," Eleanor said finally, reaching into a small bag beside her chair. She pulled out a worn leather photo album, its pages yellowed with age. "I've kept pictures of you and Harry all these years. I thought you might like to see them tonight." As they turned through the pages together, William saw himself at various ages, learning to ride his first bicycle while Eleanor ran alongside, helping her bake cookies in the palace kitchen, reading together on rainy afternoons. At every photo, Eleanor's attention was focused entirely on him and Harry, her love evident in every captured moment. "You gave us so much more than just care," William told her, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave us stability when everything else felt uncertain. You made us feel normal when nothing about our lives was normal. I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that." Eleanor patted his hand gently. "Watching you become the man you are today is thanks enough," she replied. "And seeing you with your own children, knowing you'll give them the same love and attention you received, that's more than I ever hoped for." The conversation continued late into the evening, with Eleanor sharing stories William had never heard about his childhood and offering insights about his mother that only someone who had been there every day could provide. It was a healing conversation, one that connected his past with his future in ways the formal ceremony couldn't achieve. As palace staff eventually helped Eleanor prepare for the journey back to her care facility, William realized that today's unexpected moment of vulnerability had given him something invaluable, a renewed understanding of the importance of authentic human connections in a life that could easily become consumed by duty and protocol. In the months that followed the coronation ceremony, the impact of William's emotional moment continued to resonate far beyond what anyone had expected. The image of the future king crying while looking at his childhood nanny became a defining moment of his public image, representing a new kind of royal leadership that prioritized authenticity over rigid protocol. Eleanor Davies received thousands of letters from people around the world who were touched by her story and the obvious love between her and William. Care facilities for elderly people reported increased visits from family members who had been inspired by seeing the importance of maintaining connections with the people who had shaped their lives. William incorporated the lessons from that day into his approach to royal duties. He began making more unscheduled stops during public appearances, taking time to connect genuinely with people rather than simply following predetermined protocols. His staff noticed that he seemed more comfortable with showing emotion in public, whether joy during celebrations or genuine concern when meeting people facing difficulties. The moment also sparked conversations within the royal family about the importance of acknowledging the staff and caregivers who had played crucial roles in their lives. Several other members of the family began publicly recognizing longtime employees. Breaking from traditions that had often kept such relationships private, Eleanor Davies herself became something of a celebrity. Though she handled the attention with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. When journalists asked about her relationship with William, she simply said that caring for children had been her life's work and that seeing them grow into good people was the greatest reward anyone could ask for. Catherine often reflected on how that moment had revealed something important about her husband's character that would serve him well as king. His willingness to show vulnerability and honor the people who had loved him demonstrated the kind of emotional intelligence that modern leadership required. The children, particularly Prince George, began asking more questions about the people who had helped raise their father. This led to regular visits with Eleanor and other former palace staff, ensuring that the next generation would understand the importance of gratitude and human connection, regardless of their royal status. Mental health organizations noted an increase in people seeking help after William's public display of emotion helped normalize the idea that strong leaders could also be emotionally open. His example encouraged others to acknowledge their own feelings and seek support when needed. Royal historians mark the ceremony as a turning point in how the monarchy connected with the public. The carefully choreographed perfection that had characterized previous royal events gave way to a more human approach that allowed for genuine moments of emotion and spontaneity. Years later, when people looked back on William's early reign, many would point to that single moment during his coronation ceremony as the beginning of a new era for the British monarchy. It wasn't the formal rituals or ancient traditions that had defined his leadership, but rather his willingness to show that beneath the crown and ceremony was a man who remembered and honored the people who had loved him into becoming who he was. Eleanor Davies lived for 2 more years after the coronation, spending her final months knowing that she had witnessed the boy she had helped. Rays stepped confidently into his role as future king. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by photos of William and Harry at various ages. Her face wearing the same gentle smile that had comforted 2 young princes during their darkest hours. The impact of that unexpected moment continued to ripple outward, reminding everyone who had witnessed it that the most powerful leaders are often those who remain connected to their humanity, regardless of the responsibilities they carry or the titles they hold.